Looking for reliable and convenient personal safety products? Less Lethal has you covered. As Canada's only authorized Byrna distributor, we provide a range of products for recreation, protection, and security. Explore our Byrna launcher lineup, including the LE, SD, TCR, and Mission 4, designed for different levels of performance and protection needs. We also offer the Banshee personal safety alarm, designed to protect children, women, and vulnerable individuals. Because your safety is our top priority. Shop now at lesslethal.ca.
Dan Dempsey has one of the best resumes of a pilot in the history of the RCAF and aviation in Canada, including 2 tours with the Snowbirds. One is their commanding officer and an author of a fantastic book that you can get on Amazon, A Tradition of Excellence, Canada's Airshow Team Heritage, and it is a rich one, and he joins us on TPL Media. Dan, how are you?
Good morning, Jim. I'm fine. Thanks very much for having me. Nice to be here.
Well, nice to be here. Before we get to your military career and the Snowbirds, as a kid growing up, when did you get the bug to become a pilot? When did that first enter your mindset, Dan, that that's what you want to do?
Well, really early in life, actually, like I think many kids would say about watching the Snowbirds now. In my case, it was way back in on the 6th of June, 1959, National Air Force Day in RCF Station, Rockcliffe, Ontario. My dad was a military policeman in the RCF. He was on duty that day. And so there I was down at the air show. And that was the first public show of the RCF Golden Hawks and one of the early shows of the RCF Red Knight as well. And I just remember being mesmerized by these beautiful gold airplanes and then offset by the Red Knight. And then, so I became a big fan as a young kid of flying and air shows and so on and so forth. And so, fast forward 5 years later, to RCAF Station Lincoln Park in Calgary, where we were based at the time. And my dad took me out to McCall Field, where the Golden Hawks were flying out of. And lo and behold, they taxied right in front of me. And the pilot at the back, Gold 7, Bill Grip, who I later found out, waved to me. And there I was. Now I'm 11 years old. And boy, that was it. I was hooked. So everything I did from that point forward was to try and put myself in a position, educationally and so on and so forth, where I could join the Air Force and maybe someday be lucky enough to fly in an aerobatic team. So that's how it all started for me. And it's not an uncommon story, I have to tell you. It really
not at all, Dan. And I'm thinking before you get to the Royal Military College, that those years are often challenging for a lot of teenage boys. So based on that experience with the RCAF and that Golden Knights pilot waving at you, I guess you were quite motivated through high school to stick to your math, your science, your physics to make sure your marks were up so you could be a pilot.
Well, I thought, to give myself the best chance of trying to get into the military and become a pilot, I thought RMC was the way to go. In fact, I did my first 2 years here in Victoria at Railroads Military College at the time. That was from 1970 to 72, and then on to RMC for my last 2 years, graduating in 1974. And so eventually, there were a few roadblocks along the way. I was first told my eyes weren't good enough to be a pilot. I had to take a couple of years to convince people they were. And so I got reclassified and got my wings in Moose Jaw in 1975. And then I was off to the races. And it was a glorious day and a very happy day for me and my family, for sure.
So you trained in the Tutor in 75 in Moose Jaw?
Right. Yeah. I started in, I think, August of 1974, having done the primary flying training at Portage Prairie and the Musketeer at the time. And that was 27 hours of flying time. And then we went on to the Tutor, and I think we ended up with about 190 hours to get our wings. And so that was in June of 1975. And to my good fortune and the fortune of all of my colleagues with me on that particular course, the commandant of the school was Lieutenant Colonel at the time, George Miller. And the base commander was Colonel Ralph Annis. They were both RCF Golden Hawks that I had seen fly. And so we actually graduated during the Saskatchewan Air Show in 1975. And they stopped the air show so that the 16 of us could get our wings. So that was a special privilege as well, especially with those really famous commanders in charge and leading the way for us.
Speaking with former Lieutenant Colonel Dan Dempsey, a member of the Canadian Decoration from his time as a member of the Snowbirds and a past president of the Snowbirds Alumni Association. Dan, before you become a Snowbird, you transitioned to one of the most demanding aircraft ever in the history of the Canadian Air Force, the Widowmaker, the CF-104 Starfighter in Europe, in Baden. Um, that must have been an insane jump to go from the Tutor to that rocket with wings on it in Germany, in West Germany during the Cold War.
Well, it was, and as you go up and you get into the Air Force, there's certain airplanes you would really like to fly if you can. And obviously, I wanted to try and become a snowbird someday. But the fighter I really wanted to fly was the CF-104 Starfighter. I had watched that as a young boy again at Cold Lake, Alberta, and very fortunate. In fact, myself and another snowbird colleague of mine, Denny Mercier, after our first snowbird tour, were selected for the 104. It was actually in the very last CF-104 Starfighter course. So finished that course in the spring of 1983, and then went over and flew in the last two Starfighter squadrons in Baden-Solingen, West Germany. And it was a very exciting job. It was certainly height of the Cold War. It was very serious work. We practiced every single day to go to war, and that was what our job was. We took it very, very seriously. Lots and lots of exercises, at least two major exercises every month, and we had very good reputation among our allies. We were small, we were down to three fighter squadrons at the time in Baden, but we had a very good reputation, and for the airplane that we had, I think we did a very good job. So that was an exciting tour for me, and certainly from the perspective of the family, the best tour we ever had. Living in West Germany and being able to tour around Europe at that time was really special for our family. So much appreciated.
How thrilling and how fast were you going? Because I heard the reputation is the Canadian starfighters were known for flying on the deck at maximum speed to get the target. So what kind of altitudes and speeds would you be flying in these exercises simulating battle?
Right. So yeah, it's a very good question, Jim. And because of the small stature of the aircraft, especially the small wingspan, we had to fly quite fast. So when we took off, we would be cruising at 450 knots ground speed. Ideally, unless the weather dictated otherwise, we would never get above 500 feet for the entire mission. And if you were flying in a low fly area, we would get down to 250 feet, which is a much more realistic altitude for what we were going to be experiencing if we had to go to war. So we're flying very low, we're flying very fast. Our target ingress speed, if you will, and weapons delivery speed was 540 knots ground speed. So that's equivalent to about 9 nautical miles a minute. And so we were cruising right along, and that would have been down at, around treetop level. So we did actually practice weapons deliveries. We had 3 different academic ranges in Europe. West Germany, we used one in Sweeps in France and also in Pampa in Belgium. And so all of our pilots on the squadron and all the squadrons went to the academic weapons range to deliver practice weapons at least twice a week. And then probably every 6 months or so, we would actually go to some of the live weapons ranges and drop real ordnance, just for the feel of how heavy those bombs were on your wings when you let them go, and so on and so forth. So very dynamic job, and very enjoyable job for all of us who had the opportunity to fly the Starfighter.
When did you start to find out that you may be recruited to the Snowbirds? How did that transition from being in tactical fighters to potentially being part of this exclusive elite group called the Snowbirds?
Well, I think, the nice thing about flying fighters back in those days is because our role was low level, we were very comfortable flying low level to start with. And of course, my first tour on the Snowbirds had been as a solo pilot. So I had made that as what we call a pipeline instructor. In other words, I instructed on the Tutor for just over about 3.5 years, and then made the team. But I was selected to fly the solo position, and that actually really set me up well for going on to the Starfighter, because I was already used to flying low level, doing low level aerobatics, and so on and so forth. So I was comfortable in the low level environment. And then similarly, when I came back to command the team, which was about 9 years later, I'd flown the Starfighter for that 3 years low level. And again, I'm very, very comfortable. And being comfortable, obviously, is a key to being able to fly well on the Snowbirds and fly safely. So that was a really big part of the whole training experience for me. Worked out really well.
We see tactical aircraft in their distances and videos and movies, how far away they are. But I've seen the Snowbirds a number of times, including the incredible CBC special with David Foster, and it's wingtip to wingtip. How close are you in formation of the Snowbirds in terms of distance, wingtip to wingtip?
Well, that's it. You're wingtip to wingtip. You're literally wingtip to wingtip. So, displaced probably about 3 to 4 feet behind the aircraft in front of you. But the line of stern guys, if you will, they call themselves the stem cats that fly directly behind the lead. They fly at a nose tail, which means that the nose of their aircraft is literally looking up at the tail of the aircraft in front of them. It's very close, and it's very dynamic. And depending on the conditions of the day, it can be quite exciting, because if you've got a turbulent day and a hot summer day or a high density altitude, for example, those airplanes could be dancing around quite a bit. And every pilot, and this is where the core expertise becomes so important for the Snowbird team, every pilot is trained to stay within what they call a box in his position. So, for example, the inner pilots that fly around the leader, that's 2, 3, and 4, their box is only about a foot. You want to stay within 1 foot of that ideal position, because you've got other pilots flying around you on the outside. So for the outers, your box is a little bit bigger because you don't have somebody flying off your wing, but you try and stay within about a 2 foot area of moving around inside that box. Now that's something that you achieve, once you go on the air show circuit. And this is why it takes 6 months to work up a Snowbird show, because every single maneuver is different, of course. The conditions you fly every single day are different. The winds are different. You may have to contend with weather as well. And so it's a building block process. It takes a long time. And I think if there's one thing that you build in terms of the camaraderie of your team, it's trust. You have to trust, you have to trust the leader, because the leader is the only guy looking at the ground in these formations, right? And if you're coming over the top of the loop and down the backside and gaining speed and coming out and aiming to come out at 300 feet, which is the altitude that the team normally flies at, the wingers are only hanging on to the lead. And so it's ultimately the responsibility of the lead to keep the formation safe. Similarly for the solos, I mean, the solos on their head-on crosses are quite close, and it looks really, really close from the ground, but there is some illusion involved. What the Snowbirds do with the solos is very safe. Everything they do is safe. Everything is built around safety. So if you can imagine, with safety being your principal concern, every one of those 9 pilots on your team has a comfort level, right? It's what you're prepared to accept in terms of how much movement is taking place in the formation, for example. Say on a really, really windy, bumpy day. And so any one of those pilots at any time during a show can call what we call shadow. Shadow would mean he's not comfortable in the normal formation. Let's just move it out a little wider. And so you can do that. And then everybody, there's no questions asked. Everybody just moves out slightly and keeps the show safe, to the point that, and I've actually experienced this both as a winger during my time and also as lead, where the show becomes, the bumps are so severe that it's no longer safe to continue. So any one of those pilots can say, knock it off, boss. And if he says, knock it off, that's it. The show's over for safety. So that's the trust principle that you build your team on. Really, really important. And it's been that way for 55 years. This is a system that's worked really, really well for us after all those decades.
As a lead, Dan, obviously you're looking for elite pilots with stick and rudder and aviation skills, but also how much are you looking at their personality, the teamwork, and their mindset working with you?
Really important. Absolutely. You can be the best pilot in the world, but if you don't have the personality to act as part of the team, then things aren't going to work out for you. And it's one of the things that the team has always analyzed during that tryout process. Back in my day, and it's a little different now because the tours tend to be a little bit longer now, but back in my day when it was a 2-year tour, we would bring in 8 pilots and 4 of them, and then you have a competition and 4 of them are going to make the team. Well, it wasn't just flying skills you were being analyzed on. It was your ability to interact with the other guys, to be part of the team. It was also your ability to be very self-critical of your own performance. So if we came down off a trip, and it didn't matter whether you would do it a 2-plane or a 4-plane, you come down off that trip and you say to that particular candidate, okay, how did it go in your mind? What did you think? And then you have the opportunity to spill your guts and say, well, this was good, but I was really, really bad on this. Okay. And that was one thing, to identify your own mistakes, to self-critique. But the other thing one was, how are you going to correct it? What was the technique what technique are you going to use now to make the next mission better? Is it trim? Is it power? Is it anticipation? It could be any of those things. So this is the beauty of the Snowbird tryout, because you get to analyze all of that. And then at the end of the day, you put the guys in a social environment as well, and see how they react, see how they interact with each other. So the beauty of that at the end is, you've chosen 8 pilots, who on paper have all the necessary, professional attributes and flying skills to make the team. But at the end of the day, then you sit down, as your incumbents, and you say, okay, which of these 4 are we going to take? And why are we not going to take the other 4? In other words, why do these 4 stand out? And that can be a rather long process. Every trip is graded. And then you look at the end, you say, who are the best 4 guys? And then you decide later what positions are they going to fly on the team. So really an important process.
Dan is an Air Force brat, and now as an adult with the kids of my own, I've been to a number of air shows and seen the Snowbirds. And as much as their flying impresses me, the ability of the pilots getting out of the cockpit and meeting and greeting people and
Right.
having that one-on-one almost interaction and maybe inspiring future pilots is always impressed me.
That is such an important part of the job, Jim. We're a public relations organization, right? That's why the Snowbirds exist. And it's also, you worked really hard during this show. And, some shows may go better than others. They always look good to the people on the ground, but you may say, well, that maneuver could have been flown better. I got a little wide on this particular maneuver. Some of them are quite difficult to fly in turbulence, for example. But the rewarding thing was getting out of the crowd and getting out of the aircraft and going straight to the crowd. That was just so rewarding, because those people are so excited to have watched you fly, and you got a million kids out there, and they all want your autograph, and it's such a pleasure to be able to do that. I mean, you put that Canadian flag on your shoulder, it's pretty special, and to be recognized like that, as are the other world aerobatic teams as well. We're not unique in this regard, but it's a real privilege, and this is why the team does so many public relations events. And I have to tell you that this year's team is just doing a wonderful job. I've had the occasion to see them several times now. Hamilton, Cold Lake, Victoria. We just had a huge about 9 days here on the west coast of British Columbia, and watching the team interact with the kids and so on and so forth. Kids young and old, I might add. There's lots of older people lining up for autographs as well. And it's just a real pleasure to see. And it's something the Snowbirds do so well, and why they're so important.
Dan, I know you sent me a note. There was approximately 75,000 people recently in Abbotsford at the world famous air show, and obviously a lot of Snowbird fans. But in your time as a lead, was there a city or a country that you guys visited that surprised you at the response to the Snowbirds?
Boy, that's a tough one, because the response was always really, really good. But I think that, back in my day, the big shows back then were very similar to the big shows now. Abbotsford was always huge. The Canadian International Air Show, which is the oldest air show in North America, was always huge, and you get about 1 million people down in that Toronto waterfront over that 3-day show. And so there's a special. I think for me, one of the unique shows that we flew back in my day was down actually in Reno, Nevada, at the Reno Air Races, because we were treated so well. I mean, notwithstanding all the political issues we have now with our American friends, we were treated exceptionally well down in the United States. And I would cite the example, last October, for example, at the end of the 2025 season, when the U.S. government shut down, the Snowbirds went down and rescued several of those shows. They were already on the schedule, but they were really big American shows that now didn't have the Thunderbirds or the Blue Angels to fly in them. And the Snowbirds went, and they amazed a lot of people. There was a lot of Americans who had not seen the Snowbirds before, and they were really, really impressed. And some of the reports and media that came out of places like San Francisco, for example, were really heartwarming. So everywhere the Snowbirds go, they're really welcomed with open arms, and it's so refreshing to see that continue, because the Snowbirds have performed in North America to hundreds and hundreds of locations. It's probably over 400 different locations now that the team has performed at. So there's a lot of people in North America seeing the team fly, and it's just a pleasure to perform in front of all those people, and that's what the team is doing right now, and they're doing a wonderful job.
Like a lot of Canadians, I have the question that Dine asked someone like you, who was a snowbird. How different will the snowbirds be after they transition to the turboprop CT-157 Siskin training plane? It's a big difference from the Tutor.
It is. It is a big difference. And we'll have to see how that goes. One of the things we're really concerned with right now, when I say we, I'm talking about the Snowbirds Alumni Association, of which I'm one of the directors. We we believe that the gap now, as the plan stands, is going to be way too long. For all those reasons I just explained about how intricate the training process is, and the beauty of the Snowbirds, and we're not unique in this regard at all, is that every year you take your incumbent team members and you train your new pilots. That process takes 6 months. So if you stand the team down, that core expertise, which is so vital, is perishable. Um, Snowbird flying is something you have to do all the time. And you know, the techniques that the Snowbirds use are not used by anybody else in the RCAF. So when it comes to the way we fly formation, the way we do solo aerobatics low level, nobody else teaches that. Nobody else knows how to do it. Only the Snowbirds know how to do that. So if you shut the team down for any length of period at all, that skill set is lost. And then when you try and start again, and especially if you don't start for 5 or 6 years, then boy oh boy, you've got a real challenge on your hands. And so we're just trying to find a way, a different way, a better way of making this transition. And we believe that the way to do that is to keep the team flying on the Tutor with a smaller team, very similar to what some of the other teams are doing. For example, the Red Arrows are transitioning to a 7-plane team this year. They're looking at a brand new advanced jet trainer to be introduced in 2030 or 2031. And we would like to be doing the same thing by keeping the Tutor flying at, for that length of time. So we all believe very strongly, having, collectively thousands and thousands of hours flying that airplane, that the airplane is safe. This is not an issue. And by the way, let me just say this, that we're very strong supporters of the RCF. Don't get me wrong. We're very strong supporters of the RCF. We all had wonderful careers in the RCF. So what we're trying to do here is to find a balanced way where we can keep the team flying and keep that essential core expertise on the Tutor until we can transition to a new aircraft. Now, the government has decided that they want that airplane to be the Siskin, the PC-21. It's not an airplane I personally would favor, but that's nothing against the airplane. It's a fantastic airplane. I just look at it from the perspective of whatever airplane we're going to go on to, we need to get it as quickly as possible. We can't afford this big gap. So if we can keep the Tutor flying for a few more years on a reduced team to keep the core expertise, then get the new aircraft as quickly as we possibly can so we can do that transition. Ideally, what you'd like to be able to do, and this is what the Red Arrows are going to do, this is what the Italian Fracchi Tricolori are doing with their teams, is you finish a season with your team intact, let's say, with the Snowbirds and the Tutor. Then you transition onto the new aircraft immediately, the entire team. You don't change anything. You take that entire team, you transition onto the new aircraft, and you might take an extra, say, 3 months, for example, because you're going to convert onto that new aircraft and you're going to adapt your show onto that new airplane. But you can do that, and that's the best way to do it, is a seamless transition. Then nothing changes except you're now taking the show that you've been flying and comfortable with for as many years as you've been flying on the Snowbirds. You put them on the new airplane, and all of a sudden, the next time they appear, and they appear when they say they're ready, and now you're flying a brand new air show and a brand new aircraft, and that's what we think we need to do if we can.
When you left the military, you were a lieutenant colonel, you had been in over 20 years, and even at that time, the Tutor was getting long in the tooth. Do you know any reason why the government didn't think about this transition earlier, so to prevent this gap between one plane to the next?
It's a really good question, Jim, and it's so unfortunate. I think everybody realizes now how unfortunate that this is, given the fact that the Snowbirds are so important to our country. We've been trying to get new jets for the Snowbirds for 23 years.
Huh.
I was involved way back in 2002 with some other interested parties as a volunteer. I don't get paid by anybody. I don't lobby for anybody particularly. But we wanted a new jet for the team, and the aircraft we wanted at the time, the natural one was the Hawk, which we had just introduced with the native flying training program in Canada in 2000. And so now we're 2002, 2003. BAE Systems, the manufacturer of the Hawk, was prepared to give us a very good deal on 15 Hawks for the Snowbirds. But we were in an era where, the Snowbirds were doing a pretty good job on the Tutor. There were demands, lots of demands on the military budget, the D&D budget, writ large. And as a result, everybody just sort of said, no, let's keep on going on the Tutor, keep on going on the Tutor. And we didn't get the new airplanes that we should have got. So the end result is now where we're faced with this situation where the airplane is in fact coming to the end of its useful life. It's been an orphan fleet, if you will, since 2000. We stopped flying the Tutor as the basic jet trainer in 2000. So there are some costs to that for sure. But at the end of the day, the team is so important to the country, you've got to keep it flying. So it's just frustrating. And I know that, I'm sure that there are various politicians now and perhaps some other senior military personnel who were retired that wish that somehow we could have transitioned onto a new aircraft before now, but we didn't. So this is where we are. We have to face that reality, and we have to do the best we can in the best interests of the country and the Canadian Forces and the RCAF to transition onto a new airplane just as fast as we possibly can. But the key is let's keep the airplane flying, keep the Tutor flying. It's perfectly safe to fly. Let's keep it flying for a few more years until we can make that transition a lot smoother and a lot faster.
After your flying career in the military, you had a long and illustrious career as an airline pilot, flying some of the big boys, the Boeing 777 and all these other planes across the world for various airlines. Did you ever have passengers recognize you as a Snowbird pilot and talk to you about that?
Ironically, yes. Yeah, it's amazing, when you've signed literally, and back in our day when we were doing, quite a few more shows, we signed about 10,000 autographs a year,
Huh.
every season, and that's not an exaggeration at all. We were doing 70 to 74 shows a season, and so you're doing PR functions all the time. So, when you're signing autographs, people are noting who you are. I can tell you that I still have autographs from the Golden Hawks in 1963. I'm very delighted to say I met most of those pilots. One of them ended up being my boss at Moose Jaw for a while. And so you kind of cherish these things. And so every once in a while, because you are kind of recognizable, someone will come up and say, hey, I remember you from, they may not get the year right, but they might say, I remember you when you were leading the Snowbirds and you did this. Or for example, in 1990, when we had red and white smoke to celebrate the 25th anniversary of the Canadian flag. That was a big year. It was a unique year. It was the only year we ever did the season with the red and white smoke. So yeah, it does happen. And it's kind of nice. You're kind of surprised when it does happen, but yeah, it's a nice thing when people recognize you for sure.
Oh, and you've accomplished so much in your career as an adult, as a pilot, as a professional. But I would have to think there's an extra little boost of pride knowing what you contributed to the legacy of the Snowbirds, Dan.
Yeah, it is. That's exactly what it is. Our legacy goes back 97 years. In 1929, just 5 years after the RCF was formed, we had this new little aerobatic team called the Siskins, and that was the Siskin Fighter, and that's why
Oh,
the new trainer is being called the Siskin. But the Siskin Fighter was formed in 1929. They started off with 2 aircraft doing low-level aerobatics. Then they expanded to 3. And then by 1931, they had the very first time in Canada, this great Trans-Canada National Air Pageant, it was called. And they went to 26 cities, starting in Sydney, Nova Scotia, all the way out to Vancouver. They actually opened the Vancouver International Airport in 1931. And it was 5 Siskins at that time, 5 Siskins on the team, and about 18 civilian aircraft. So it was this great entourage that went all the way across Canada. Imagine in 1931, demonstrating, flying prowess and aerobatics to thousands and thousands of Canadians. And that was really the really big start. And then we've had so many different illustrious teams over the years. The Blue Devils was a team on the Vampires. We had lots of turboprop teams. You know, when in back in my day when we had the Starfighter and the Voodoo and the CF-5, all those aircraft had multiple teams. You know, one
Mhm.
stage, one year, we had 5 different Voodoo teams flying across the country. And then you had the Golden Centenaires in 1967, which were a phenomenal team and set a record of 121 shows in 1967, a record that'll never be matched ever. An incredible year celebrating Canada's 100th birthday. And of course, they had been formed thanks to the efforts of the Golden Hawks in the 5 years that they flew from 1959 to 1963. But you know, you have to take your hat off to, and in fact, we just had a big celebration here at the BC Aviation Museum in Victoria, where we dedicated the original Snowbird 1 aircraft. And one of the gentlemen we dedicated that to was Colonel O.B. Philp, who'd been the commanding officer of the Golden Centenaires. And he became the base commander in Moose Jaw in 1969, eventually discovered these white airplanes, asked what they were. Well, they were his old Golden Centenaire airplanes. And so that got OB's mind turning, and he said, right, I'm going to start my own little air show team here and see what we can build on. And that's exactly what he did in 1971. A 7-plane team, non-aerobatic, building block process. And, you know, in 1972 went to a 9-ship. And then in 1974, they actually got the new paint scheme that they're now, you know, Canadians are familiar with. And now we're doing formation aerobatics. We're doing changes within the formation, much as what you see in today's Snowbird show. So that all started way back in those days. So we dedicated this airplane to OB, who was from Sydney, British Columbia, and also to Major General retired Glenn Younghusband and Colonel retired George Miller. And they were the first 2 pilots to fly that very aircraft, which was tail number 175, and now it's proudly on display at the BC Aviation Museum. And the last gentleman that we were really happy to dedicate the airplane to as well was a gentleman by the name of Badger, call sign Badger, Berger North. Badger was a senior instructor at the Flying Instructor School in Moose Jaw in 1971, but had a flair for art. And it was Badger that actually designed that Snowbird crest, the Snowbird logo, that's now so famous
Oh.
around the world. So having those 3, well, OB's gone, but he was represented by his daughter. But dedicating the airplane to those 4 individuals was really special, and that was all part of that great, you know, West Coast extravaganza we just had with the Snowbirds. So we had the entire Snowbird team there with us, and boy, that was so special to have them there. And of course, the long autograph lines. I mean, the autograph line for the Snowbirds probably stretched close to 100 meters at one stage. So that's how many, you know, kids and adults were out there to try and meet the team. It's really special.
Well, it's amazing to me that here's here David Foster, one of the most accomplished singer, songwriter, producers, musical icons in the last 50 years. He looked like a teenager, giddy, standing by the Snowbirds in the photos. I think it's amazing.
It is amazing. And, you know, David is such a great friend of ours. David is one of our original honorary Snowbirds. There's a Society of Honorary Snowbirds that was set up in 1995. And the idea was to recognize special people, Canadians and Americans alike, but mainly Canadians, who had done something special for the team over the years. And of course, David had this great movie come out in 1986, I think it was 87 actually, called The Real Stuff,
Mhm.
and narrated the film and had all this fantastic footage in that production that went, you know, shown all over North America for sure. And so Dave's been a close friend ever since. And so to have him come out now and do his great 40th anniversary tribute concert in Victoria, because that's his home, and then have the Snowbirds come and help open that show, man, that was special. So the Snowbirds really went out of their way to do that because, of course, they're at Abbotsford, and they're there for the Abbotsford Air Show. So, you know, kudos to the Abbotsford Air Show and to the Snowbirds for having, you know, adjusted the schedule to make this happen so they could come. And I can tell you, the people in Victoria were thrilled. There was about 70,000 out for that concert, and they were absolutely thrilled to see the Snowbirds fly over. And also, we had 3 CF-18s from 410 Squadron in Cold Lake come over as well. So it was one of the great nights in Canadian history. I tell you, if you're a David Foster fan, it was absolutely magnificent, and I was very proud to be there.
In closing, I have to ask you, what was your call sign?
My call sign? It's one I don't use anymore. I was christened after the Snowbirds. Actually, most fighter pilots have a call sign, and I was christened G-Man. G-Man because as a solo pilot, I was pulling +7G and -3G every single day that I did a practice or show. So Bert Doyle, who was a good friend of mine, whose son is now a major general in the RCF, I might add. Bert coined that call sign for me as G-Man. So every once in a while you see it crop up, but I don't pull much G anymore.
He is Dan Dempsey, retired Lieutenant Colonel, Canadian decoration, past president of the Snowbirds Alumni Association, the author of A Tradition of Excellence, Canada's Airshow Team Heritage. Dan, thank you so much for shining a light on a legacy that has made myself and millions of Canadians walk a little extra proud watching the Snowbirds. It's greatly appreciated.
Thank you, Jim. It's really a pleasure to be here, and I would invite all the folks down in Toronto now, get out and watch the Snowbirds. They're going to put on a spectacular show for you. It's got a really, really good show this year. So get down and support the team, and the same goes for the rest of the folks in Eastern Canada where they are now. Thanks very much.
I know I'm going to be there at the CNE, so I'm going to take you up on that, Dan.
Well, I'm going to be there too, so we'll look you up.
Okay, thanks, Dan.
All right. Thanks a lot, Jim. Take care.